Hello everyone, welcome to Casual MMA.
Welcome back, everyone. Earlier this week, we did a breakdown of all the fights on our UFC 277 prelims. If you haven't seen it, make sure to check out the description for a link. Today, the focus of our episode is going to be breaking down the main card for UFC 277. So let's not waste any time and go ahead and get started.
Let's go!
Before we get started, here's a quick look at our main card featuring 5 fights, including the 2 title fights to end the night. Our main card is going to kick off at 10 p.m. Eastern with a fight between Magomed Ankalaev and Anthony Smith.
So let's start with the light heavyweight fight. According to the records here, it's gonna be interesting because somehow the favorite record is 17-1 and the underdog is 36-16. So you wanna tell me more about these fighters?
Yeah, so Magomed Ankalaev, as he said, is 17-1. He has only ever lost once, obviously, based on that record, and it was to Paul Craig, who actually fought on the UFC London card that was last week. And he actually lost the fight in the last second of the last round. He ended up getting submitted. But looking more recently at Magomed's last 5 fights, he actually has 2 knockout wins against Ian Cutelaba, which were both in 2020. So really the story behind that, for anyone who doesn't know, is in their first fight, Cutelaba was kind of messing around with him and started acting like he was wobbly on his feet and couldn't stand up. And the ref at the time actually stepped in and stopped the fight. And then Cutelaba kind of was upset because he was like, I was just acting and having fun. So future reference, don't do that because the ref might call the fight. So they ended up rematching. It did not go Kutelaba's way as Magomed Ankalaev was able to knock him out. And since then, he's had 3 decision wins. So interestingly, whenever you see a Russian fighter, most people assume, okay, this guy's probably a Dagestani wrestler. Magomed Ankalaev, though, likes to stand up. He likes to use counter-striking and get the knockouts for his victories. So, like I said, though, his last 3 fights have gone to decision. He fought Nikita Krylov and Volkan Oezdemir, and those fights both occurred in 2021. Interesting, both of those fighters actually also just fought last week on UFC London, and they both came away with the victory.
That's pretty cool.
So, and in those fights, he won pretty easily. He did lose the first round to Nikita Krylov, but it was after that, he pretty much was the better fighter, secured the second and third round to get the win by unanimous decision. Against Volkan Oezdemir, most people had it at 30-27. One judge gave the second round to Oezdemir, but by the end of the fight, Oezdemir was really just trying to survive. He was exhausted. And then in his most recent fight against Thiago Santos, once again, he went to decision. Most people gave him 49-46, winning 4 rounds to 1. But some people think that Thiago Santos actually won 2 of the rounds, the first 2 rounds, that is. In the second round, Santos was actually able to hurt Ankalaev, but he wasn't able to capitalize. So, obviously, he has a really impressive record, and both Krylov and Oezdemir are now coming off of wins. Thiago Santos, however, his most recent victory, while Santos is a well-known name, he is 1-4 in his last 5 fights. So, really, this is Ankalaev's chance to, fight someone who's on a win streak and maybe can get him into that number 1 contender position where he can actually fight for a title. But up until now, really, his level of competition hasn't been able to propel him into that spot.
How about Anthony Smith? What happened to his last 5 fights?
Yeah, so Anthony Smith, is pretty much a legend in the UFC. He's been around for a long time. He's fought for the title. And, actually, a lot of people thought he was on his way out of his career going into 2020. He lost to John Jones back in 2019 for that title fight. And then, he lost two more, one to Glover Teixeira and one to Alexander Rakic. And those were both in 2020. So, he did get a TKO loss to Glover Teixeira and then ended up losing by decision to Rakic. But if you think about it, Glover Teixeira went on pretty quickly after that to become the light heavyweight champion. And Rakic was the number one contender spot until he ended up getting hurt recently in one of his fights and taking the loss there. So both of those guys are really at the top of the division. So losing to them, obviously not great, but it's really high-level opponents. And that's something that we don't really see Ankalaev having. Since then, he fought once at the end of 2020 and had two fights in 2021. So those were against, kind of guys with good records, up-and-comers. Devin Clark and Jimmy Crute both had 12 wins. Jimmy Crute only had one loss on his record at the time. And he also fought Ryan Spann. So all three of those wins were round one finishes. He got a submission against Devin Clark and Ryan Spann. And when he was fighting Jimmy Crute, he did a ton of damage to his leg in that first round, and the doctor stopped the fight before the second round even started. So, like I said, a lot of people thought Anthony Smith was kind of out of it. He was done with his career, and he's kind of making a comeback run. It's something that we've seen a lot in the light heavyweight division recently. Like I said, Glover Teixeira, everyone thought he was done as well, and then he made a title run and became the champion. So we'll see if Anthony Smith can pull off the upset and, make that title run for himself.
So, who you think gonna win this fight? Well, I mean, do you agree with the betting odds here or no?
Yeah, so I can't say with confidence that I think Anthony Smith is going to win. I will say I think he's being extremely disrespected with those odds. Saying that Ankalaev is a minus 550 favorite and he's a plus 400 underdog is ridiculous. For that reason, if I was betting, I would definitely bet on Anthony Smith. I think this fight is going to be close. Anthony Smith has been really impressive recently. And, Ankalaev's last fight was against Santos, who, like I said, is 1-4 in his last 5. And it was a decision win. So I think if Smith comes out and he's aggressive, I think he can get the job done. So at plus 400, I definitely think he's worth putting a bet on.
Cool. Moving on to flyweight fight between Pantoja and Perez. All I know is that they have pretty close records. One is 24-5 and the other is 24-6. I haven't seen any of their fight and would like to know more about them. You want to start with Pantoja?
Yeah, so looking at Alexander Pantoja, he is 3-2 in his last 5 fights, where he has 1 knockout and 1 submission. And then if you look at who he's been fighting, it has been high level of competition, and he's also been decently active. So his most recent losses, he does have a loss in 2019 to Davison Figueiredo, who is the current flyweight champion. Mm-hmm. It was a decision loss. And, obviously losing to the current champion is nothing to be ashamed of. His other loss is to Askar Askarov, who actually just received his first loss of his professional career against Kai Kara France, who is fighting for the interim title later on the card. So losing to Askar Askarov, also, that's a guy who was on the verge of fighting for a title and, probably will be fighting for one sometime soon. Then if you look at his wins as well, he has a win in 2019 over Matt Schnell. Fans of who watched UFC London will know that Matt Schnell just had a great war with the Tibetan Eagle, where he was able to get a TKO win. And Matt Schnell's kind of been in that mix in the top of the division for a while, never quite being able to break through, but always a tough fight. So Pantoja was able to get a round one knockout over him. That's a good win. He also has 2 fights in 2021. He beat Manel Cape by unanimous decision. Since then, Cape has remained active, and he has 2 wins since then. So that win has also aged well, with Cape having 2 wins in a row. And he also has fought Brandon Royval, who he got a round 2 submission victory over back in August of 2021. Similar to Manel Cape, Brandon Royval has also fought 2 times since that fight and come away with a victory both times. So Brandon Royval is one of those guys as well. He's really definitely still in the mix in the top of the flyweight division. He just hasn't been able to break through. So overall, Pantoja's been fairly active with 3 fights since the beginning of 2020 and 2 fights in 2021. And it has been as well, it's been against decent competition.
Cool. How about Alex Perez?
Yeah, so Alex Perez, he is considered very good. I do have some questions just because he has not been very active. Obviously, like you said, he does have 24 wins, just like Pantoja does. And both of them have a mixture of submissions and knockouts. Perez definitely likes to go for multiple takedowns a fight, get the fight to the ground, but he hasn't fought since November of 2020. He was actually fighting Davison Figueiredo for the championship, and he lost by round 1 guillotine. Once again, you can't really fault him for losing to the champion, but the fact that it was so long ago and he's taken a long time off since then just kind of gives me a little bit of hesitation when thinking about what to expect with him this weekend. Now, I will say it's not entirely his fault. He's had multiple bouts canceled where he was supposed to fight either Matt Schnell or Askar Askarov. Just never worked out. And so he finally has a fight now against Pantoja. If we look a little bit further back, he did have 2 fights in 2020 before fighting for the title. He fought Formiga and won in round 1 by way of leg kick. But Formiga has 1 win since April of 2019. So once again, a little worried about the quality of opponent there. Obviously, Formiga was 23-7 at the time when they fought. But the fact that he hasn't won since April of 2019, it just kind of gives me a little bit of doubt when looking at Alex Perez. Similarly, Jordan Espinosa, who he also beat in January of 2020, he won with a round 1 submission against Jordan Espinosa. And oddly enough, Jordan Espinosa also has 1 win dating back to April of 2019. So there's a lot of, to me, I think that raises a lot of question marks that he hasn't fought in almost 2 years. And his last 2 wins are against people who haven't won since 2019. Have 1 win dating back to 2019. If we do look at his other 2 fights, he did beat Mark De La Rosa back in 2019. And his only other loss in his last 5 fights is to Joseph Benavidez. Benavidez is a legend of the sport. He really established the flyweight division, and he, participated in multiple fights for the championship against Davison Figueiredo before retiring. So, that's definitely high. He's only lost to high-level competition in the past. But the problem for him is that Pantoja is high-level competition as well. So I think if he can win here, it'll be a big statement win for him. Mm-hmm. But based on his inactivity, definitely cause for concern, if you ask me.
Well, I just noticed that both of them have the records of 3-2 on their last 5 fights. Do you think it would be hard to say who is going to win this fight?
Yeah, I think there's a reason that the odds are fairly close. They're both very talented. They both have good records. They are both 3-2 in their last 5, but both of their losses for both fighters are against quality opponents. So to me, I really think if you look at what the odds makers were thinking, it has to have been this is a close fight, but we haven't seen Perez since 2020 when he fought Davison Figueiredo. So, by default, Pantoja gets the edge due to activity. And I think there's value in that. But I think it'll be a close fight nonetheless. Both guys are really good on the ground. They both, try for multiple takedowns every fight. They try for submissions. So, interestingly enough, that means we might see a stand-up battle. Mm-hmm. But I'm not quite sold. I think, especially Perez, I think is going to try to get it to the ground. But sometimes when you see these matchups where you have two guys who are so good on the ground, it ends up being a stand-up battle. So that might be, one thing that people might be expecting, and that it goes to the ground, and they might not see it.
Next on the main card is a heavyweight fight. Who do we have here?
Yeah, so this fight, I think pretty much everyone's excited for. We have Derek Lewis, the Black Beast, against Sergey Pavlovich. So, I think it wouldn't be too blasphemous to say that during media day when they asked Derek Lewis if he knew who Pavlovich was, and he said no, I think a lot of fans out there might have that same view. He is 15-1, which is a great record, but he's definitely not as famous. He's only had one fight since 2019, so he's been out for a while. And, obviously, Derek Lewis, huge fan favorite. Derek Lewis is the underdog in this fight, though, and so he's really trying to make a comeback, kind of reestablish himself. He does have the most knockouts in the history of the UFC, so that's an impressive record. And like I said, everyone loves to watch him, so it'll be exciting to see how they match up here.
How have these fighters performed recently?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start off with Derek Lewis. So once again, really popular fighter. He's been very busy. He actually has 6 fights since the start of 2020. So, like I said, very active. In that time, he's 4-2. Although over his last 5 fights, that's 3-2. He is obviously known as a knockout artist. He knocked out Alexei Oleinik in 2020. He knocked out Curtis Blades in a viral knockout in 2021. That fight was really interesting, though. Really, Curtis Blades is known as a wrestler. It was awkward to watch, to be honest. Derek Lewis really didn't throw any punches. He was just kind of waiting for Curtis Blades to shoot so he could land one uppercut. And while it was awkward to watch, it was apparently a good game plan because he ended up knocking Curtis Blades out in brutal fashion to get the win. Following that, in August of 2021, he was matched up against Cyril Gane, who would go on to fight for the title later after that. To be honest, though, this is probably the most worrying fight on his recent resume. He fought Cyril Gane in Houston, which is his hometown. Lewis says that he was kind of a little bit under a lot of pressure from that, and that's kind of what affected him. But he really didn't even show up to that fight. He lost in the 3rd round, but it was really just Gane picking him apart. He was just kind of sitting against the fence, covering up, not really doing much the entire fight. So that one's really concerning. But he did come back after that later that year to get a round 1 knockout win over Chris Daukaus in classic swang and bang fashion, as he likes to say. So that was a good win. And then he fought again in 2022 in February, where he lost to Tai Tuivasa. Tai Tuivasa is also a big fan favorite. They were going back and forth. He got clipped by an elbow and ended up getting knocked out. So, Tai Tuivasa is actually right up there in talks for getting an interim title shot, actually against Cyril Gane. So if you do look at his track record, the two people he lost to are really in talks for being interim champion. So his losses are quality, but there's definitely a little bit of worry, like I said, in the Cyril Gane fight. But that's exactly why this fight is being made, right? Like I said, Pavlovich has only fought once since 2020, and so actually once since October of 2019. So this is kind of his chance to say, hey, I'm 15-1. I just got a big win in March, and now I beat Derek Lewis, so my name should be up there as well. In his last 5 fights, he is 4-1, but because of his activity, that dates all the way back to November of 2017. His one loss in that was a round 1 knockout against Alistair Overeem. Overeem obviously being another legend of the heavyweight division in the UFC. And then since then, he has 2 round 1 knockouts in 2019, and he was able to get another round 1 knockout in March of 2022 against Shamil Abdurakhimov. Probably said that wrong. I apologize. But so round 1 TKO. He is definitely a knockout artist. That's what he does. He is 15-1, and he has 12 knockouts in his professional career. So I would expect to see a stand-up battle. Derek Lewis has been joking in his lead up to this fight that he might show off his blue belt and get some takedowns. But we'll see if he actually attempts that. Either way, I think this one will be exciting. Hopefully we don't get a repeat of when Derek Lewis fought Francis Ngannou and they just kind of stared at each other for the entire fight. I don't think we're going to see that. I think it's going to be exciting, and I think the odds are really close for a reason. It's a heavyweight fight that could go either way. Someone's going to get knocked out. It's probably going to be in the first round, maybe the second round. I think it's definitely a fight to watch. It's going to be fun. I'm cheering for Derek Lewis. He's so much fun. So, fan favorite, like I said. I hope he gets the win, but we'll have to see what happens.
So what's your prediction? Are you saying that Derek is going to win this fight?
My prediction is somebody wins by first round knockouts. I don't know who it's going to be, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Moving on to the co-main event, the flyweight interim championship fight between the Assassin Baby and Dan Bling. One of the fights that I'm looking forward to. I said that Moreno is one of my favorite fighters in episode 0 of Get to Know Us. If you haven't watched it yet, please check it out so you know more about us. Anyway, besides Moreno being my favorite, France's training history is pretty interesting too. He trained in Thailand for a while before moving to New Zealand and started training at City Kickboxing, the most famous MMA gym there, home of many well-known fighters and the 2 champions, Israel Adesanya and Alexander Volkanovski. Since I have not watched any of France's fight, could you please tell me more about his performance in his recent fights?
Yeah, and Kai Kara France is definitely confident that he's going to be the 3rd champion down at City Kickboxing. He's talked a lot of this week about his confidence that he's been able to get from having that experience working with Israel and Alexander Volkanovski, so that he felt comfortable this whole week dealing with all the extra stuff that comes with a championship fight. I'm glad we're starting with him though, because it does feel like he's the challenger, even though this is an interim title fight, so neither of them has a belt. It does kind of feel like Brandon Moreno, is the champion holder, and he's fighting, and the Kai Kara France is coming in as the challenger. We talked a lot about the last 5 fights, what they've done, in the last couple of years, to kind of see how they've been doing recently. Fun fact about this fight is it is a rematch, and some people may not have realized that coming into this week, but If not, they've definitely been talking about it. They fought each other at the end of 2019. For both of them, that was 6 fights ago, which means obviously both of these guys have been very active, having 5 fights since the beginning of 2020. For Kai Kara France, he after that lost to Brandon Moreno, which was just a great war. It was actually Brandon Moreno's first win coming back since he was cut from the promotion. Moreno actually came back to the promotion and got a draw against Askar Askarov, who, as we mentioned before, only has 1 loss. And we'll get to that shortly because it was to Kai Kara France. So, Moreno was definitely trying to prove himself. It was an exciting fight. Moreno did end up taking the decision. But then looking at Kai Kara France's last 5 fights since then, he's 4-1. He's really started to put some impressive performances together. He did win a unanimous decision against Tyson Nam back in February of 2020. He was supposed to fight Alex Perez, who he also, as we mentioned, is on this card, and we did his breakdown a little bit ago. But that was canceled. He ended up losing by submission to Brandon Royval. We've also mentioned him. Very talented guy who's in the mix in that division as well. But since then, he had 2 knockout wins in 2021, both in the first round. One was actually against Cody Garbrandt on the same card as Amanda Nunes versus Juliana Pena the first time, and that was in December of 2021. So after those 2 knockout wins, he got a fight against Askar Askarov. Pretty much everyone considered this to be the number 1 contender fight. It was a close fight. It went to unanimous decision. Most people agree that Kai Kara France won, that it was 29-28, with Askarov winning the first round. But there are some people who think that Askar Askarov won the 3rd round as well, which would obviously tip the scale in his favor. But that said, the judges all saw it 29-28 for Kara France, so he got the win there, and that set him up for this rematch with Brandon Moreno for the interim title.
That's awesome. What has Moreno done since the first fight? I know he fought a trilogy against Figueiredo. What else has he done?
Yeah, so obviously, when you think of Brandon Moreno right now, you think of the Davison-Figueiredo trilogy. It was, pretty epic. And some people thought that there would be a 4th fight. But I don't think anyone's disappointed that we're getting the Kai Kara France rematch. After he beat Kai Kara France in 2019, like I mentioned, both of these fighters have 5 fights since that fight. So he does have a decision win over Formiga. I mentioned him earlier. He only has 1 win since April of 2019. So, not that tough of an opponent, but it was a good step for him. Like I said, Kai Kara France was his first win in the UFC since he had been cut and then re-signed. So that was a good win there. He also then went on to fight Brandon Royval, who, if you remember, I just mentioned Brandon Royval actually submitted Kai Kara France. When Royval fought Brandon Moreno, Moreno was able to get a round 1 TKO victory. To be fair, I don't know, it was kind of one of those freak injury accidents. He hurt his elbow or shoulder and kind of couldn't even defend himself, so he was just laying on the ground and the ref had to step in. But it's a win nonetheless. And then after that, he obviously had the trilogy with Davison-Figueiredo. So only a month after beating Royval, he actually had his first fight against Figueiredo, and it was a majority draw. So you don't see those very often, but it was such a good fight. Instant classic, back and forth war. And so they obviously went into a rematch right away. When they did the rematch in June of 2021, Davison-Figueiredo, really didn't seem like himself. And he has since kind of said that was the case. But obviously, you can't make excuses. Brandon Moreno came out. He looked excellent. and he just kind of dominated the whole fight and ended up getting a round 3 submission over Figueiredo. Since now they were 1-0-1 against each other, with Moreno winning one fight and the other one being a draw, and now Moreno just took the championship from Figueiredo. They got scheduled for their trilogy bout right away. We definitely did see a different Figueiredo in that third fight. So it does make you kind of believe that maybe the second fight was an outlier and there was something wrong with Figueiredo. Once again, excellent fight, back and forth war, and the decision went to Figueiredo that time. So that's kind of what led up to this. Is now Brandon Moreno is really the clear number 1 contender, but he's just fought the champion 3 times in a row. The draw really throws a wrench in any kind of trilogy because there's no definitive winner. They've each won one fight, and then they have a draw. So, there was definitely talks about setting up the 4th fight, but Figueiredo has said that he has an injury. If you ask Brandon Moreno, he thinks he's faking it, but, I'll definitely give him the benefit of the doubt. And it also gives us this interim title fight against Kai Kara-France.
Well, quick question. Do you think the 4th fight between Brandon Moreno's and Figueiredo is necessary?
I think that if he wins this fight, it's absolutely necessary because he will be the interim champion, and if you're the interim champion, you get to fight the champion. That's how it works. Now, Brandon Moreno has said this week that if he wins and Deiveson Figueiredo isn't ready to fight by the end of the year, that he wants to fight somebody else. He wants to defend his belt. He even said that the winner of Pantoja versus Perez could very well be that person. So I think there's pretty much a 100% chance we see that 4th fight in the future. Whether it's this year or next year or somewhere down the road, that's yet to be seen. But definitely going to happen at some point.
That makes sense. All right, I have the most important question here. Do you think France will be able to take the belt from Moreno?
Yeah, so technically, like I said, Moreno doesn't have the belt, but I do agree with your sentiment that it does feel like Moreno is kind of the defending champion here, even though that's not really the case. I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I think, we've already seen it once, but both fighters have evolved a lot. I think Kai Kara-France looks really confident this week. The interesting thing will be, is this going to be a stand-up battle or, is it going to go to the ground? I think if it does go to the ground, you don't see a whole lot of takedown attempts from Kai Kara-France. So I think it would definitely be initiated by Brandon Moreno. But Kai Kara-France has excellent takedown defense. So I think this one's going to end up being another stand-up war. I do think that means it could go either way. I definitely, with Brandon Moreno and his competition and those 3 fights against Deiveson Figueiredo, I think it'd be foolish to doubt him. But I think this is a great matchup. I think it's going to be exciting. And I don't know who's going to win, but I do think Moreno does have the edge for sure.
And what do you guys think? Please feel free to leave your prediction below in the comment section. Next is the last fight on the main card between Juliana and Amanda, the fight that I'm looking forward to the most. Before we talk about that last fight, let's take a look a little further back.
Yeah, so right before we start, it's interesting to note that even though Juliana is the current champion and she won their last fight, she is the underdog coming to this fight. I think that's fair. I mean, Amanda was one of the most dominant champions in the history of the UFC. So giving her that favorite is totally fine in my mind. If we do look prior to their matchup, obviously they fought in December at UFC 269, and that's going to be our main focus here. Prior to that, in her last 5, Juliana was 3-2. She has 2 submission wins. It's important to know, though, that those 2 losses are her only 2 losses in her career, and her last loss before those 2 fights was in 2013. So Moving on right away because really the focus here is on their most recent fight. If we do look at Amanda Nunes, obviously she did lose to Juliana in December, so she's 4-1 in her last 5. She does have a couple decisions in there. They were very dominant against Felicia Spencer. A lot of people gave her a 10-8 round in almost every single round, and she won 4 out of the 5 rounds against Jermaine Duranamine. And prior to prior to the Juliana Pena loss, she had not lost since 2014. So, obviously Amanda is still considered probably between her and Valentina Shevchenko, the 2 greatest women fighters of all time. So, really though, our focus here is going to be on their fight in December, really, and what's happened since then. Why this fight might go the same, why it might be different.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about what happened last time between these 2 fighters. So in round 1, at the beginning, they were looking at each other, then Juliana slipped. After that, they started to work on their ground game. Amanda got Juliana's back, but she still managed to flip around and face Amanda. In my opinion, Amanda dominated the first round here. And then in round 2, they exchanged punches and started bleeding. Juliana put Amanda on the ground and tried to get a neck choke. It wasn't that long and it looked like she wasn't fully on Amanda's back yet, and Amanda tapped within a couple seconds.
Yeah, it was a pretty quick tap for sure. I think, definitely round 1, Amanda did dominate. Although Juliana did slip, there was definitely also some leg kicks in there that contributed to Juliana falling down. But like you said, she did do a good job kind of trying to reverse position and making Amanda work on the ground. As you said, she didn't really hold the position that long in the second round. I think it's interesting. I do feel like the perception is that Amanda just didn't show up and she wasn't prepared and she didn't expect an actual fight. I think if you look at the first round, though, with that, she did pretty much dominate the whole round. I don't know if you can fairly say that. I think the other thing, too, is she did seem really gassed out. She seemed like she ran out of energy in the second round.
I agree.
I mean, that just kind of blows my mind as a champion, how you can gas out that quickly. Not to mention, she's gone to decisions as a champion before, so that means she's fought all 5 rounds, dominated all 5 rounds in the past. So the fact that she gassed that early, I guess, is a big question mark. But definitely, I do agree, the tap was really quick. Juliana didn't have hooks in. Even the choke wasn't even fully in, and she tapped. So it was definitely an interesting end to the fight.
Well, for me, I had not seen any of Juliana's fight before, so I had nothing against her. I watched the last fight with open-minded and intended to see her performance. On the other hand, I was cheering for Amanda. I love how she fought and her energy. It made me feel like she was a legend. However, after watching that last fight on UFC 269, sorry Amanda, but I was pretty disappointed. Please don't get me wrong, it's okay to lose, but she tapped too early. If I was her and knew that there was no way I could fight back, I would prefer to be choked out instead of tapping, but well, who I am to say, right? I don't know, I just feel like Amanda wasn't passionate enough to save the belt, which kind of makes sense because she already had the belt and no one stood up and fought her like Juliana did. However, that shouldn't be the mentality of a champion though. And when we look at Juliana, she was hungry for the belt. She said that she would do everything to get the belt since she was in the Ultimate Fighter. And she already proved herself that she deserved it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there are a lot of questions that people have raised whether or not Amanda was in the last fight, and mentally and or physically, if she was healthy. I think Another really big question that has been raised is since that last fight, she has switched to a new camp. She trains at her own gym with her own team. And I understand her, when she talks about it, I get why she says she did it. I think the issue to me is, if you look at the facilities, it's so much smaller. It's definitely not as state-of-the-art as she had at an American Top Team. I understand that she didn't like being around the other fighters who might be her competition. She even said that Kayla Harrison was one of the reasons she left. Mm-hmm. And, well, that's valid. I think you just lost your belt, and your plan should be to get the best training possible. And I think having good people to spar with, good people to train with, is essential to that. And now that she's by herself, you really have to question how much effort did she put into this camp? Is she getting as good of training and things like that? I'm sure she's trying her hardest, but just being your own head coach has a different dynamic to it, and a lot of people, don't think that it's a good option, especially when you're trying to get the belt back.
Mm-hmm. Well, Amanda claimed that she wasn't physically 100% coming to the last fight. Some said that it was a fluke for Juliana, and some said that Juliana deserved the belt. How about you? Do you agree with some of the things people said? Who do you think is gonna win this fight?
I don't think it was a fluke. I definitely don't think it was a blowout like people said. Amanda dominated the first round, and in the second round, she obviously got hurt and submitted, but just in those 2 rounds, Juliana's face was beat up. She took a lot of hits too, but that's what she needed to do to get the win, and it worked for her. So I don't think it was a fluke. I think it was a good plan by Juliana. She executed it well. I do think there are some questions about Amanda entering that fight, but I don't think those questions have gone anywhere. Obviously, we have to assume that she's healthy. She also, but she did switch camps, and she's now her own head coach. So that, raises a really big question for me. Another interesting dynamic to this fight is the UFC weigh-ins were this morning. Juliana Pena was the last fighter to the scale. That typically means that you had an issue with the weight cut. It didn't necessarily look like that to me. She looked fine. She looked happy. She wasn't nervous when she got on the scale, so she knew she made the weight. Yeah. But whenever you come in at the 1 hour and 59-minute mark out of 2 hours, it does raise questions. So we'll see if that plays a factor. Amanda Nunes is one of the greatest fighters of all time, so I definitely think she has a very good chance to win her belt back. But I definitely don't count Juliana out. I think it's going to be a good fight, and either one can come away with a victory.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see. Who do you guys think is going to win the fight? Please let us know in the comment below.
That wraps up our full card preview for UFC 277. Once again, if you didn't check out our prelim breakdown, the link is in the description. Don't forget to follow us and tag along on Twitter as we tweet live during the event. Also, once the event is over, we will be having a recap show on Sunday, the day after the fights, so make sure to tune in for that.
Mm-hmm. And please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment below with your UFC 277 prediction. Share with us, who you like and which fight you're looking forward to. Please don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Thank you so much for watching.